Here's one of the most useful shifts I can give you for secondary teacher planning. The endpoint of your unit isn't there to make you plan more. It's there to help you eliminate what you don't need to plan. Because once you know what students actually need to be able to do by the end of your unit, you finally have a filter. That activity you love, maybe it belongs. That resource you've been saving for 3 years, maybe it doesn't. That thing you thought you needed to create from scratch, maybe students don't actually need it to get where they're going. Knowing the endpoint gives you permission to decide. And as we've been talking about throughout this series, planning is deciding.
Welcome to the Secondary Teacher Podcast, the podcast for middle and high school teachers juggling multiple preps to get the strategies to reduce overwhelm so that you don't have to choose between being an effective teacher and prioritizing important relationships. I'm your host, Khristen Massic, a 10-year high school engineering teacher, former middle school assistant principal, and teacher coach. Every week, we will discuss strategies, systems, and time-saving tips to help you not only survive but thrive as a multiple prep teacher.
Last episode, we talked about the ready enough sort, 6 categories for looking at everything you already have before you create anything new. Reuse, adapt, create, find, decide, wait. But here's something important I want to add to that conversation. You need something to sort against. Otherwise, you're just looking at a folder of activities and trying to decide which ones seem good. Your endpoint gives you the filter. What do students need to be able to do by the end of this unit? That's where we're starting today. Not, what chapters do I need to get through? Not, what activities did I do last year? Not, what standards do I need to cover? Those things matter, but I want you to take it one step further. What will students actually be able to do that demonstrates they've learned what you intended? That's the question. And once you can answer it, everything else in the unit has somewhere to point. So let's look at an example. I want to use a world language class, and I'll be upfront, I'm not a world language teacher, but I've had opportunities to support world language teachers over the years, and I think it's a useful lens because those classrooms are so explicitly focused on what students can actually do with what they're learning. So imagine you're planning a unit for a world language course. Your endpoint isn't, we finished unit 4. It's not, students completed the vocabulary activities, and it's not, we covered all the material. You're trying to move students toward a proficiency target. Maybe within this unit, you want students to be able to communicate about a familiar topic or understand certain information when they hear it or read it, or produce something using the language they're developing. Now I have something I can plan backward from. Now the activities have a job to do. Once I know what students are supposed to be able to do, every activity has to earn its place. Maybe I have a vocabulary activity I've used before. What's its job? Does it help students build the language they're eventually going to need? Maybe I have a partner conversation structure. What's its job? Is it giving students practice communicating before they're expected to do it more independently? Maybe I have a listening activity. What's its job? How is it preparing students for where we're going? And then maybe I have this really engaging activity I've been saving. Students would probably love it. It's related to the general topic. It would be fun, but when I compared it to the endpoint, it doesn't really get students any closer. That's when I have to remind myself a good activity isn't automatically the right activity. And that doesn't mean I delete it forever. Maybe I use it somewhere else. Maybe I save it for another unit. Maybe I don't use it at all. That's a planning decision. And planning decisions made against a clear endpoint are so much faster than planning decisions made against a vague sense of this seems good. This is why I keep coming back to the Introduce, Practice, Produce framework in this series. If produce is where students demonstrate what they've learned, then I need clarity around produce before I can make good decisions about introduce and practice. What are students working toward? Then I ask, what do I need to introduce so they have the knowledge, context, vocabulary, or skills to begin? What opportunities do they need to practice so they can try, get feedback, make mistakes, and improve? And what will they produce that gives them an opportunity to demonstrate their learning? It's not about filling 3 buckets with activities. It's a progression. And the endpoint is what makes the progression make sense. Here's where I want to connect this back to the ready enough sort from last episode. One of the 6 categories was wait, and I think this can wait might be one of the most valuable things a thorough teacher can learn to say. Because if you care deeply about what you're teaching, there is always more you can add. Another example, another activity, another resource, another extension, another thing you could create. If your definition of a finished unit is nothing else could possibly be added, you are never going to finish planning. There's always more. But when you know your endpoint, you can look at something and say, that's interesting, but students don't need it to get where they're going. Or, I would love to build that eventually, but they can reach the outcome without it. Or even, I don't know whether they need that. I'm going to teach a unit and find out. This can wait. That's not lowering the bar. That's putting a real boundary around the planning. And that boundary is what makes finishing possible. Inside the first round of the unit planning lab, I watched something shift in how teachers were talking about their planning. Not because they suddenly had more time or better resources, but because they started making different kinds of decisions about what they already had. I want to be honest, this was a small group, intentionally small for a first round, and I'm not going to overstate what I observed. But what I saw was consistent enough that I want to share it. Instead of everything feeling like something that needed to be created, there was more, I already have this. I can adapt this. I don't need this yet. One teacher described something that felt easier about planning afterward as being able to match instructional activities to the stage of learning they were meant to support, rather than thinking about each activity as a standalone lesson. And I think that's exactly the shift. She wasn't finding better activities. She had a better way to place the activity she already had. That's what made the end point possible. And I want to say this specifically for multiple prep teachers, because every course can start to feel like its own separate universe. You could have vastly different courses and subjects, and your advanced course is different from your introductory one. That content absolutely changes, but your planning process doesn't have to. You can still ask, what are students working toward? What do I need to introduce? What do they need to practice? What will they produce? What can I reuse, adapt, create, find, decide, or wait on? That process travels from one course to another. And for secondary teacher workload, that matters enormously because you're not reinventing how to plan every time the content changes. You're applying the same decision-making structure to different content. That's what makes multiple preps manageable instead of multiplying. So if you're holding onto the one unit I've been asking you to think about throughout this series, here's what I would do next. Don't open your Google Drive yet. Don't search for another activity. Don't create anything. Ask, what should students be able to do by the end of this unit? Try to get beyond the content you're covering. What does learning look like? What would students make, do, explain, demonstrate, communicate, design, solve, or perform? Whatever makes sense for your classroom. Because once you have that answer, you've created a filter. Now you can look at your pile of resources and make real decisions. And remember, the endpoint isn't there to make you plan more. It's there to help you eliminate what you don't need to plan. Next episode, we're talking about what done actually means, because perfect is not a useful standard for a unit you've never taught. And I want to give you a finish line that actually exists, one that's specific enough to stop at, without requiring you to predict every possible thing that could happen in a unit before you've taught it once. That one's coming up next. And if you're sitting with a unit that needs this kind of attention right now, this is exactly what work we're doing inside the unit planning lab. You're not planning your entire year. You choose one unit. Then you work through it intentionally, clarifying where students are going, organizing the learning through introduce, practice, produce, and making decisions about what you already have, what needs adapting, what genuinely needs creating, and what can wait. All of the content is available as soon as you join. Link is in the show notes. Before the next episode, go back to that one unit and ask yourself one question. If this unit goes well, what will my students be able to do at the end that they couldn't do at the beginning? Start there. Because once you know where your students are going, you can stop asking, what else can I put in this unit? And start asking the much more useful question, what actually needs to be here? That's planning with the end in mind. And that's how the unit gets smaller, clearer, and much more teachable. Finish something that makes tomorrow lighter. I'll see you next time.